as we started discussion last week, we talked that this was a section of Gita written predominantly by the third author Sauti, which described many scholars as Dharmyamrutam, Dharma Amrutam, Amrutadhara, a continuous discussion presentation by Lord Shri Krishna of 73 verses. For example, the last 19 verses of chapter 12, where after Arjuna had asked the question which is important, the Bhakti Yoga or praying to a Akshara, those 19 verses, all the 34 verses of this 13th chapter that they're discussing now, and the first 20 verses of the chapter 14, those 73 verses, is considered a continuous presentation by Lord Shri Krishna to emphasize the value of living a righteous life in order to get ready and receive the knowledge of Brahman. We briefly alluded on to 4 basic Mahavakyas, where one was the Upadesha Vakya, Tattvamasi, followed by definition of Brahman, Prajnanam Brahman, Lakshmana Vakya, definition. And then after you have received the Guru Kripa, Deva Kripa, and Shastra Kripa, the first time an individual is able to go into deep meditation and experience it yourself, it's called Anubhava Vakya. I am Atma Brahma. And then after having achieved that state of living, you live as a Anusandhana Vakya, a Jivan Mukta, Aham Brahmasmi. And Anandi, you are there in the group here today. And when you have that understanding, then you can comfortably say that what is there to worry about? All of us have to go this particular course. There's just a physical death. And that's what Kumud was telling you when you were with us at that particular time. We started discussion last week by starting a verse which did not exist at the time of Lord Shankaracharya, because his opening description of the 13th chapter is pretty exhaustive, and to maintain the continuity of 73 verses. The subsequent authors have introduced this particular verse, which makes it easy for us to understand the topic that under discussion. He's added, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva, Kshetram Kshetratnyameva Cha, Etat Veditum Ichchami, Jnanam Nyayam Cha Kesha. Basically, 6 questions are asked. Oh, no big deal. Just tell me what these 6 things are. What is Prakriti? What is Purush? What is Kshetra? What is Kshetratnya? What is Jnanam? And what is Nyayam? No big deal. Just quickly tell me so they can pick up and watch the football game at noon. I try to explain to you that I'll try to make it as easy as possible. And it's up to you to make it as difficult as you want to make it. To understand, Kshetra is equal to Prakriti. Kshetradnya is the same as Purusha, the same as Brahman. And we'll come to that a little later. We discussed last time, the Kshetra was basically the creation that we see around us. That consists of this creation, all of us as human beings, all living beings, consisting of Prithvi, Aap, Tej, Vayu, Akash, as human beings, Mana, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara, all the organs of perception and organs of action. But again, this comment is basically for John, because you had asked that question a couple of weeks ago. Even though the kshetra that we have is real for each and every one of us, is still considered as Maya. And the reason why it's called Maya, not because we don't live through it or enjoy it, perceive it, experience it, act on it, is because it does not have a permanence to it. That is why it's called Maya. So if you have a presence in Bhuta, past, in the present, and the future, then that's called Satyam. And that'll come to Kshetrajna, Purusha, and Brahman. But when you Kshetra, you have existence for a finite period of time, and is destructible over a period of time, it is considered as Maya. So this is what we talked about at Kshetra. And Kshetrajna is without the presence of Kshetrajna, we are totally useless as far as functional activities are concerned. For example, Shankaracharya described that as a brightly glowing lamp which has got 5 holes. So it looks like there are 5 lights which are flashing through. But that central lamp is glowing is because of the presence of Chaitanya, awareness, consciousness, or Brahman, or Purusha, or Kshetrajna, which is within us. That is the only entity that allows us to see, to hear, to smell, to touch, and all the functions that we perform. And when that Chaitanya moves out, the awareness goes out, we, as a Kshetra, falls apart at the physical level. So that is exactly what we studied last time. And finally, we opened up the topic with a 7th verse of the 13th chapter, which says, Amanitvam, Adambitvam, Ahimsa, Shanti Arjavam, Acharya Upasanam, Shaucham, Stairyam, Atma-Vinigra. You just counted up about 8 different qualities which are important of foundation knowledge, and we are going to talk about 20 of these as such. We barely touched on 2 of them last time, and I might as well freshen them up before taking 2 more for this morning. As I mentioned to you, this is a foundation knowledge that we need to have in order to understand Brahman in a fairly comprehensive way and experience it in this very existence. Last time we studied Amanitvam, absence of manitvam. That means humility or modesty. Mana asya asti iti mani. One who makes his virtues obvious. Is good to have those virtues. Good to be good. But if you start demanding the respect for being virtuous, for performing what you're doing, that demand itself is totally unacceptable. So that basically goes to the self-conceit, and that behavior is totally unacceptable. Now, you can command the respect by your good activities, but you cannot demand them just because you think you did a good job. Many times what happens is these people behave in that way is because they are not sure about themselves as to what they have accomplished was really accomplished by them. So they need some degree of validity from other people, a support system. And it's very important, like a good coach will tell the player when he comes back from the field, yes, did a good job. So that support system is very important. And many times these people who are behaving in an appropriate way are behaving mainly because they feel that really have not accomplished. They don't feel good about themselves unless somebody praises them. What I'm trying to learn myself when I say this is, when you come to understand all these 20 qualities as foundation knowledge that Sri Krishna is describing it, that makes us better human beings to appreciate the goodness in others. Then only you're able to understand the Brahman, because unless and until you see the weakness, shortcomings in others and still hold them together as a part of you, you really cannot become a comprehensive person who creates the entire creation Brahman. So it is important to support somebody who does a good job. But again, as I mentioned to you, it's very important to do a good job, but don't demand for the respect for that particular things. The second portion we mentioned about is adambitvam. Now, when I talked about amanitvam, at least that person has done a good job, but demands excessive respect. And adambitvam is the guy who is demanding respect for the thing that he has not accomplished. He has done something maybe good, but glorifies to such an extent, and he expects that to be accepted as his standard. So amanitvam is not good. Adambitvam even is worse. And they do lots of different things to show off how rich they are, how much they have, and so on and so forth. So that is something which is totally unacceptable. And we concluded last time with Pasunda Kumar's comment about a person showing off how much he knows, big shots, talking about that. I know the president of India, I was telling, right, Pasunda? But except the person said, well, that's wonderful. But does the president of India know you, putting him in the correct place? That's where we concluded the last time's discussion that we were concluding from Milwaukee. That brings us to today's discussion of two values itself. Ahimsa and Kshama. Shanti and Ahimsa. Now, Ahimsa is paramo dharma. Obviously, we should not be hurting anybody. It's the ultimate of the values according to a Sanatana Dharma. But when we are hurting people, we all of us have to remember the hurt doesn't come only at physical level. The words can be even more painful than the physical abuse that one may receive. And one has to take it even further. Even you thinking something bad about somebody else is also a part of violence. So at the level of actions, at the level of expressions, at the level of thoughts. So these are some of the three things to remember. There are two kinds of ahimsas to be considered. Remember, there is a universal value and an absolute value. What I'm saying is, non-violence is the ultimate goal of any person who is refined, but that is not an absolute value. What I'm saying is, as a physician, if somebody comes to me with a pain in the abdomen, and my examination, I find in the right lower quadrant of the abdomen is a point tenderness in McBurney's point, I'm going to make a diagnosis of the patient has probably inflamed appendix. I'm going to take you to surgery, crack open your belly and take out the inflamed appendix out. That is violence by itself, but there the value of saving the life, which is universal value, trump the value of non-violence. So it has to be based upon a situation, circumstances. The same way it applies to when there's a tyrant somewhere, a person who is a so-called king who's a menace to the society, you have to resort to the appropriate actions to get rid of that thing. For example, Sri Krishna in his life did have the responsibility to take care of the inappropriate position, inappropriate individuals in the society, which are the menace to the society. So we have to remember, ahimsa is not hurting beings by your physical actions, by the words you express, and the thoughts you think, but it has to be based upon desha, kala, paristiti, situations that you decide. Now, again, when looking from the perspective of Brahman, Brahman creates everything in this creation that we see when connected with Prakriti. And as far as the mother is concerned, every child is equally important. So we want to make sure that we do not hurt anybody by any means, if at all possible. I mean, since I'm a lover of tennis, just as much as cricket, if you watch Federer and Nadal play the championship game, which went all the 5 sets, and say Nadal finally won and excited, and he's over the moon at that particular time. But then when he comes off from the floor and runs up to the net, he realizes that his dear friend, Federer on the other side, has indeed lost that tournament, lost the match. So he overcomes with the grief on his behalf, and he has the ultimate sorrow. So that is the kind of relationship one has to have to make certain that you celebrate your victory, at the same time being sensitive enough to other person's pain when we're talking about enjoying your victory. The other thing which I want to emphasize when we're talking about ahimsa is many times people who are vegetarians tend to be too critical of the people who eat the living entities. And I understand as a physician that our teeth are grinders and not met with prominent canines with the meat splitters. But nonetheless, for us to criticize the people who want to enjoy the meat is inappropriate, because everybody has to decide what he or she needs as far as the individual is concerned or their body. But what I'm suggesting is every entity that we eat is alive. Sanskrit says, Jivo Jivasya Jivanam. Because unless and until we are able to consume what is alive, we cannot survive. Even when we're eating the fruits, even we're eating the vegetables, they also under the microscope are alive living cells. I prefer fruits myself because the tree does not die in that process. Because the fruits are the best, or tubers from the ground are important because nothing is going to come out of it. But what I'm commenting about is killing entities for sport is something which I would not like. Killing the birds, the animals for hunting, just for the sport of it and leaving those bodies dead is totally inappropriate. If you are a meat gatherer and want to eat as a food for the family, I think that's perfectly fine. If you're going out fishing to bring the fish for the family, it's fine. But as a sport, something that I would strongly suggest that we should not do. And if you remember the famous story of Gautam Buddha and Ajatashatru, where Ajatashatru were trying to do the animal sacrifice of a goat as doing a ritual which is prayerful, but sacrificing the animal was something totally unacceptable to Gautam Buddha. And he said, no, save that goat. You can sacrifice me if you like. And that's when Ajatashatru changed his behavior. So I would suggest that we do not use killing individuals as a sport, but if you have to eat something living to survive, is perfectly fine. But again, to emphasize, ahimsa is one of the foundational virtue of our philosophy that we practice. The final point I want to start, and I purposely moving at a faster pace because I wanted John to be here at the present time. I'll open up the topic of Shanti. Now, sometimes Shanti is sometimes not fully understood. Shanti is much more than forgiveness. Now, from Sanskrit point of view, Kshama is an act. Shanti is an attitude. What we are learning in this section is how to change our attitudes to behave and recognize that we are integral part of Brahman and how Brahman will interact with each and every one of us. So Shanti is an attitude. Again, being a student of Sanskrit, both the word Kshama and Shanti arise from Sanskrit root Ksham, are translated as usually as patience, endurance, forbearance, or forgiveness, if you go to the English dictionary. Unfortunately, forgiveness implies a holier than thou attitude that stems from pride. The true meaning of Kshama and Shanti is much more than simply forgiveness. The true attitude of Shanti implies remaining serene, patient, and observing self-restraint under all circumstances, treating everyone with love and compassion, and even to those who harm you. The value of Shanti is accommodation, which is a beautiful human embellishment that takes a certain inner richness. It is one of the most important attitudes for the seeker who really wants to discover the self, Brahman, that's what we're talking about this morning, which accommodates the entire world. The self accommodates ignorance, error, jealousy, passion, anger, greed, arrogance, and the entire world with all its limitations, because Brahman created it all. It also accommodates all the pairs of opposites. Now, as a matter of fact, in Kathopanishad, self is referred to as the great accommodator since it is unopposed to anything. So it's kind of amazing the way the description is there in various Upanishads. Now, compassion is a trait born out of accommodation. It allows one to understand the other person and let him be as he is. Accommodation frees us from reaction. In the absence of interference of such reaction, one perceives any situation as a matter of fact and allows him to respond to situation appropriately without the sense of intolerance. A situation is a fact, is only a fact when we perceive it without a reaction. Because if we don't tolerate it and behave in a way that we react to it, then we create problems. So let it be, don't react to it at all. So thus Kshama means much more than forgiveness. It means a cheerful acceptance of situations and behaviors over which one has no control or which one cannot change. Kshama is fundamental to all relationships and most essential for a happy and successful life. Practicing it in day-to-day life requires reducing expectations from others, becoming more accepting of people and situations. This unique quality, stressed by Lord Sri Krishna, is absolutely essential for one's spiritual progress. When this personality trait is coupled with non-violence, is brought together, the individual turns into the saint. These are saintly qualities. Now, this is interesting. Take a step further. Sati api samarthye apakara sahanam. Suffering hurt or offense, even when one has the ability or strength to retaliate, is the correct definition. Kshama is often incorrectly understood as suffering silently or putting up with hurt without reacting or retaliating. This misunderstanding implies suppression of the feelings of anger, resentment, even when they are justified. Our suppressed feelings cause inner suffering, and one cannot take it anymore. There comes about an explosive reaction which causes hurt in every which way. The way I look at it is, just imagine a mother is holding up a baby, and baby is kicking the mother in the chest. Mother is getting hurt with that kick, but mother still holds the baby close to her bosom because mother loves it. So even though she's able to do something in the form of punishment, she still tolerates it. That is the way to understand as far as Shanti is concerned. Now remember, I may be sounding confusing, but Kshama is not a negative attitude of silent suffering. Rather, it's a positive and constructive attitude of cheerful acceptance by which a person becomes more large-hearted, grows in inner maturity and happiness. One accepts the situation, behavior without retaliation because he recognizes that he has no control on the situation or to change at that particular time. With inner maturity and fortitude, We accept the people, situations as they are, and let's go of all expectations and divines don't expect or demands anything from anything else. Now, forgiveness and accommodation are fundamental to all relationship. Harmony and happiness come about when each of a relationship is appropriately maintained. Every individual exhibits, every person, both virtues and vice. Nobody's perfect. We always note that everyone has a few characteristics that we like and adore, and a few that we do not like. But we must remain cognizant of the fact that very observation is just as true about us in the other individual's opinion about us. That's exactly why accommodation is fundamental to all relationships. Even if the other individual may be willing to change, it may not be possible to fully accomplish that particular goal. The true essence of Kshama is that we cheerfully accept the limitations or defects of the other and treat him or her with love and respect despite those shortcomings. So put up with me. Reduce expectations. In our daily life, if we practice Kshama by accepting the things as they are, we accept it. We accept insects, bugs, Minnesota's annual crop of mosquitoes, and the heat of Arizona summers. We accept the madness of mad and eccentricity of the foolish without reaction. We do that because we accept the entities and situations and climates as they are and are willing to relate to them and adjust to them. Unfortunately, this is very important in our day-to-day life. When it comes to our friends and relatives, we sometimes do not extend towards them even a fraction of tolerance that we have for a fool or a crazy antics. A fool may never disappoint us, but unfortunately, a friend or relative often does, because we do not regard the friend with the same tolerance and accommodation with which we accept the fool. If we in our life were to show large-heartedness and equanimity in accepting the defects and limitations of those who are close to us, and thus practice quiet forgiveness, trust me, we would avoid disappointments. This will certainly lead to a closer bonds of love and friendships with friends and family. If you look at any family situation, what I'm commenting, just what I commented just now, is very, very important. We keep expectations and we get into trouble. So finally, we can maintain the attitude of Kshama if we try to understand our own dispositions honestly. How naturally do we accept our faults and limitations? How difficult do we find it to change our attitudes and behavior when others expect us to do so? This is the most effective method to be friends with most, if not all, is to accept gracefully other people and situations as they are. That's the greatest thing that we can remember and hopefully put in our day-to-day life. If we understand the practice of Kshama properly, we would find that of efforts to change and improve situations of people will be very, very effective. Kshama calls for an absence of expectations, not an absence of effort or response. Let me repeat. Kshama calls for an absence of expectations, not an absence of effort or response. If we accept even unfavorable situation as the grace of Ishvara, even unfavorable situation, the reactions of anger or resentment will not arise. It is a fact that everything that happens in our life is indeed in the best interest of us in the long run. We maintain the unwavering Shraddha that whatever Ishvara does is proper and fair to remain composed in unfavorable situation. If one's intentions are pure and unselfish, and the cause and purpose of the activity is justified, it is just a matter of time before the things will change dramatically. Sometimes a deep-rooted misconception leads to individuals' ardent views. One needs to remain firm, but most importantly, non-judgmental. We must respond to person's intentions rather than behavior. Discriminate between the person and personality. No person should be judged entirely by the behavior he or she exhibits in a particular instance. Look at sandalwood. Sandalwood, which is inherently fragrant, will indeed begin to rot if it immersed in water for a long time. Yet it would be a mistake to conclude that its nature is to stink. The sandalwood remains fragrant within, even when the surface has rotted. Similarly, God resides in the heart of every person, even one who appears to be rude and uncultured, like the two youngsters who vandalized our temple. The rudeness are probably incidental and on account of upbringing, culture, environment, age, and hormones. The love and sweetness of affection, the love, sweetness, or affection, which is the essential person, is overpowered by the harsh manifest behavior. You must always remember that despite of that external demeanor, the core of every individual is that exalted Purusha, Brahman, the divinity. Alertness and self-introspection are the only means to overcome the impulses of likes and dislikes. If those qualities are not in play and on the constant guard, despite realizing the value of Kshama, or wisdom and sense of discrimination gets overpowered, and we tend to act out of impulse and in response to provocation. Lack of control of these likes and dislikes, which have been acquired over the past experiences, results in uncontrolled anger, and one realizes that only after the episode of anger has subsided. This particular value, Kshama, is absolutely essential for making the spiritual progress. Anger and despair cannot survive when there's a Kshama well established and has become an integral part of a personality. A person with a forgiving and magnanimous mind is a blessing wherever he or she goes. The Itihasas, the Puranas, contain many stories highlighting the stories of Kshama. Way back, there's a story of sage Bhrigu and Lord Vishnu, where sage got angry and kicked very hard on the chest of Lord Vishnu. But Lord Vishnu did not get angry. But what he did was, he asked the forgiveness of Bhrigu for having caused the discomfort to the kicking foot when the sage was kicking him hard on his chest. And finally, to remember, Kshama and Ahimsa that we discussed morning are the saintly qualities. Let me conclude by the story of Sant Eknath. He lived on the banks of the river Godavari, where he took bath every day in the morning. One day, a person who held a personal grudge against Sant Eknath spit on his face every time he emerged from bath of river Godavari. This went on for 108 times. When finally the individual fell at the feet of Sant Eknath and sought for his forgiveness, the saint replied, "My brother, really, I am highly obliged to you. On my own, I bathe only once a day in the sacred river. But today, thanks to you, I had the opportunity to take a bath in the holy Godavari 108 times." Indeed, as we conclude, one who possesses the virtue of Kshama, forgiveness, and Ahimsa, non-violence, is none other than a saint. Kshama, Virasya Bhushanam. Kshama is the ornament of the brain. Accommodation is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of kindness, large-heartedness, and inner strength. Empathy and compassion and kindness to others come naturally to the forgiving person. A saint pays no attention to other person's behavior. He is able to appreciate the true person behind that personality. Kshama makes the person's heart grow in maturity, and one becomes more tolerant and accommodating. Such an heart indeed gains the vision of Ishvara, the manifest God, naturally and effortlessly. The fundamental value that we're discussing this morning about understanding Brahman, part of Jnanam. I'm sorry for getting too long on this subject of Kshama, but I think it's important to emphasize that because it has helped me personally a great deal. There's still a long way to go, but still nonetheless, I thought it was important to share with you. I'll stop at this stage, and well, most importantly, I want your comments and, if possible, if necessary, questions.
Hi, namaste.
Namaste, good morning.
Yeah. I guess I have to ask you about ahimsa. I felt I understood Kshama and that quality quite a bit. You elaborated very well on that. But to me, the non-injury, non-violence is a little confusing because you also talked about justice there. So then, we should not react. Of course, we should not be hunters for the sole purpose of killing, etc. But for consumption, it's a different thing. I mean, I understood all of that. But, our whole Gita was based on a battlefield. So obviously there was justice involved in it. So to me, ahimsa is administering of justice in some way. So sometimes you do have to, I don't know about violence, but you have to speak up at least. I mean, in this day and age, violence is against the law, but could you elaborate on that? How we reconcile everything? At what point do we say, okay, we do not look away, we have to react, we have to act, etc.? Could you just explain that a little?
Well, I think everything is situational, as I mentioned to you. Okay. I think your point is well made that it looks as if, and many scholars have written about Gita as a book on fight, battle. But really speaking, you really have to take into consideration how much amount of energy, time that Sri Krishna and other people had put to prevent that particular war. They did to such an extent that if you wanted to keep the kingdom, so be it. Just give me 5 small villages. Here's a small little piece where we can call it as our own. We don't need the kingdom. So when a person goes to the nth degree, even though he is righteously the king of the place, he got to the nth degree. And they have gone out of the way to kill Pandavas. And what is happening is, since they were the king, they establish what is the dharma at that particular time. Whatever the king does is considered the righteous way of living it. So if a person in the leadership position is supposed to behave and so everybody has to emulate it, then somebody needs to come and take care of the situation. So Shri Krishna did everything called Shri Krishna Shishtai, as you know. I don't need to remind you. So he did everything possible. But like if you remember, Shishupal had 100 aparad before he killed him. So sometimes you have to allow tolerance to a certain extent. But when the tolerance, inappropriate behavior by individual to go to such an extent, you don't have any other choice except for to take the action to get rid of that individual. So it is not that Sri Krishna does not have Kamsa Chanura Mardam, and killing the entities was given. But important to remember is that is not the first resort. And that too, Naina, if you are in a position to act, any Tom, Dick, and Harry cannot take the gun because Second Amendment allows you to have a gun and take an action because you think this is appropriate. If you are not in a position of power, you don't take it. So ahimsa should be the basic fundamental value, but again has to be behaved and used with desha, kala, paristhiti. Whether if you're the king, the authority, situation calls for it, situation and essential makes it, then you have to act. You're not afraid of using it. But again, the reason why you act is because preventing further deaths. So again, is preventing further ahimsa. That's why you take an action in the form of ahimsa to prevent further deaths. So again, it's a medical term, that's the way I look at it. I don't know if I'm confusing or not, but.
Yeah, no, common good. You're doing
exactly. Common sense is very essential, absolutely. That's the beauty part of our philosophy, Naina, you know it.
Yeah.
I miss your dad because he would be asking questions.
Yeah, stepping in that role here.
Yeah, no, that's right. Any
And
other questions, guys?
Yeah, Dr. Sane,
Yes.
Kshama is one thing you said is good virtue. And if we look at history, it's like, Prithviraj Chauhan and Muhammad Gauri, right?
I remember.
He kept Kshama, Kshama, Kshama 17 times. Maybe he was waiting for 108 time. And finally, it ended up in Hinsa against him and a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what I heard Vedas say, you have to have the enemy realization also, that who is the enemy, right? So it's if you don't have that, then you kind of end up in doing hinsa against you at one time. So if you leave the enemy alive, then it'll come back. So hinsa is required at that time.
That's for example, you're right. The thing is, it has to be in a balanced way. For example, when our temple was vandalized, we threw a line to the youngsters to redeem themselves by changing their behavior and understanding to change their way of life. If they were not to pick up that opportunity and pursue the same path of violence or inappropriate behavior, there was an avenue for us to put them behind the bars. So it has to be done in such a way that, and the story of Prithviraj Chauhan and Muhammad Gauri you're talking about, that's important. But I think for that requires a certain sense of judgment on the part of the leader to see how many times you're going to give it a chance. So I cannot go in that particular point in time, but the team around him has to advise him too. So unfortunately, the things cannot change.
Yes, thank you.
Namaste, Dr. Sane. This is Anandi.
Hi, Bala.
Just following up on the concept of Kshama, basically it's forgiveness without any agenda. Unconditional forgiveness is what you basically communicated. It's something that you don't do expecting something in return. It's no agenda, basically, without, it's not expecting anything in return, if I gather what you said.
But the thing is, you observed it right. And when I get the notes to you, then you can read it a little more and over again. We have to get into called pratipaksha bhavana. We really have to walk in those people's shoes before we understand why they behave the way they do. What happens is, since we do not have the full understanding of the situation in which he or she is, when they behave that particular way, we have to accept the situation as it is without we reacting it. It happens. Later on, when that individual cools down, if he comes around and discuss it, he'll understand why he or she behaved in the way it is. And I was emphasizing it. It's very easy for us, or less difficult for us, if somebody is remotely known to you, let it be where it is. Because more challenging in a close family circle or friend circle. Because what happens is expectation is a problem. We expect that individual to behave in a certain way. Because what do you mean? She's my daughter. She's my granddaughter. He's my dear friend. How can he behave that way? Because what happens is there's a particular expectation of that particular person. But the thing is, the key is, let it happen the way it is. That person that you know is a friend of yours has his own conscience too. He or she will come back around and come back and say sorry. You understand what I mean? But the thing is, if you behave in a reactionary way, it hurts you because you're closest to him, but hurts the other person. And sometimes the thing gets spiraling out of control. So I think that value is just amazing. This foundational value is much more than forgiveness. We'll go a little further.
Yeah, the thing that you mentioned, there's a favorite phrase or expression that you say, you need to walk a mile in that person's shoes to understand what they did at that particular instant. And that would probably give a better perspective in terms of, getting to the act of forgiveness.
Yeah, it's called pratipaksha bhavana, right? Exactly.
Mm.
Good question, though. Good.
I
How are you
have,
feeling, Anandi? Any questions?
No, I was just thinking about this Shanti. And there is always a funny saying at our house is you cannot buy Shanti from store, you have to create it for yourself. But sometime to just get out of a situation, you say something, saying that that's going to calm down everything, then that you feel good about it, just okay, I did the best, so I am not going to worry about it, that kind of thing attitude. Because Bala always says, this is a nanosecond of your life, so don't
Absolutely.
think about it, don't mull over it or something like that.
Yes.
So, but even though then you say, okay, that's it. This is all, well and good, we, it's like a Shema, then I need to create that Shanti in my mind, that peacefulness. So it is the right way of looking at things, whether you solve the issues or not.
No, the thing is,
That is one of my struggles.
trust me, from my experience, they do get solved. They do get solved. If you let the tincture of time go in between, you'll be amazed how the things unravel itself and get corrected.
Okay.
But the thing is, if you expect it, the only thing that can happen, expectation be fulfilled. And that creates problem. Because when you start thinking about things over and over again, those reactions in your body keep multiplying, like the bacteria keep on going up fast. Best thing is to let it go. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I have one more cup of coffee. But with no sugar.
You can hear me. This is Naina again.
Sure.
Anandi was talking about the Shanti and what that means. I mean, we think that means complete contentment and whatever, sereneness, and every mantra is followed at the end with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now it's translated as peace, peace, peace. But now it looks like it's so much more than just peace. So could you just explain why it is that it ends with that particular Shanti, 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 and not Shama, 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 or anything like that?
I'm glad you had that question. Because what I was discussing, the Shanti, K-S-H-A, Ksha, not Shanti. Shanti is peace, Shanti is peace, Shanti is peace. Shanti is forgiveness. What we discussed today, Ksha, the Kshatriya, not Shanti. So that's different words. So Shanti we're teaching 3 times because there are 3 major enemies that create problem. The problems coming out from natural phenomena. People happening like earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, all those things, that is Daivi. One arising from other people around. The dogs barking, neighbors bothering, those are the people from outside. The third kind of peace you're asking, Shanti, is peace from Adhyatmic, related to your body, mind, intellect. So you're asking peace from 3 different entities: the natural phenomena, the things around, and the things within yourself. So that is Shanti. That's why you're asking Shanti. Shanti, we're talking about is forgiveness, accommodation, serene acceptance of the situation, and let them be what they are. Let the time pass by and they'll come around. So that Shanti was different than the Shanti we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay?
Subtleties.
Sanskrit.
I have a question.
Yes, Bala.
I don't know whether you already covered or not. Where do the qualities of gratitude and contentment, where does this fall in this list of values that you talked about?
That does not come in this particular section.
Okay.
But when you see, what my plan is, we talked about these 20 verse values described as jnana in the 13th chapter as a foundational knowledge to gain the understanding. But I'm going to go back and then talk about the other part of the 73 verses, which will value the qualities of a ideal bhakta. There are 39 values there. In that part of it is there.
Okay.
And then ultimately end before the end of the year, go back to second chapter, Sita Prajna. Because once you are grounded with the value to receive the knowledge of Brahman, because basically mathematics, again, and that's my subject, is a enlightened bhakta is equal to the God itself. In the basically the 39 values is talking about from second verse to 20th verse in the 12th chapter. All those qualities, if become part of you, then you are no different than Brahman itself. But then when that understanding comes about, then what you practice, you become founded, grounded as a Sita Prajna. So it started in the second chapter, Sita Prajna Bhasha, Samadhi Srista Kesha. So he continues. As a matter of fact, Vyasa could have completed Gita in the second chapter. That was the end of it. But then Vaishampayan and Sauti added so many different things and created, which is much more digestible to the people. So it would have been much more toxic with the second chapter alone. But I'm glad that they added these chapters to make it much more easy, assimilable by the people. But again, it has been done over and over again. 3 times a day, you have medicine, you take it morning, evening, afternoon. Remember? But again, as I mentioned to you, you still be a CME, it's continuing medical education. So you have to be in the company of good people. So because even these sages and saints would go astray because if they were alone and putting on the pedestal themselves by all of the people. So they have to be always in company, communication, so that everybody is able to support one another. Because there's nobody who is perfect all the time. But by company, you can remain perfect. As I mentioned to you, the perfect way is in the river of Narmada. All the stones are smooth and round,
Right.
because they're together hitting each other. That's what I call perfect company satsanga.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. What you're first covering is 20, is it universal values of Hinduism in a sense?
The 20 values, foundational things which are needed to understand what Brahman is.
Okay.
Because when he asked basically 6 questions, what is Purush, what is Prakriti, what is Kshetra, what is Kshetratnya, what is to be known Niyam, and what is Jnanam. So we're discussing Jnanam. But Jnanam is not Brahman, but that is basically before you get a PhD, you got to have foundational knowledge, and that's what I'm discussing. But I'm going to take it easy for us later on to become a simple bhakta. Because being a good individual who's devoted is a good start. Because our parents and grandparents did not go to PhD classes, but they were just as much, if not better, prepared than we were. Because the devotion itself is ultimate. I mean, if you go back to what Sant Namdev says or Tukaram says, they were not having degrees from various universities, but there for them to be in love and total devotion of God itself. For example, if you remember in Pasaidan, Nandev is not asking anything for himself, everything for the benefit of everybody else. If he wants one, let me be in totally devoted to you and give me blessings that I'll remain that way. So that's what he's asking. So I think if you are able to remain in totally devoted fashion to ultimate, everything else falls apart. Because if you are attached to the deity of your heart, you become one. You don't become separate. So automatically, you become automatically absorbed in that entity that you love. So it doesn't matter what method you use, ultimately you reach the same goal. So, but since we are so-called educated, we're discussing in this way. So the great part about it is Sanskrit having not changed in thousands of years, I can still discuss it with you. So that's good.